What happens when a man has everything, a booming business, a beautiful home, and a devoted wife who helped him build it all from the ground up? What happens when he decides that's not enough? This isn't just a story of infidelity. This is the story of James Blackwood, a millionaire who made the biggest gamble of his life. He traded 15 years of loyalty and love for a new promise, a new life bundled in the arms of his pregnant mistress. He kicked his wife, Eleanor, out into the cold, with nothing but a suitcase and a broken heart. He thought he had secured his legacy, but legacies built on lies are fragile things. And months later, when the truth finally came, knocking, it didn't just ask to be let in, it kicked the door down, leaving him utterly and irrevocably speechless. The scent of roasting lamb and rosemary filled the grand open-plan kitchen of the Blackwood residence. It was a smell that for 15 years had meant home comfort and celebration. Tonight it was the smell of a carefully constructed lie. Eleanor Vance, her auburn hair tied back in a loose but elegant knot, placed a bottle of 1998's Chateau Margaux on the marble island, the same vintage they had shared on their wedding night. It was their 15th anniversary. James Blackwood walked in, loosening the silk tie from around his neck. At 45, he still possessed the rugged charm that had first captivated Eleanor. He was a man carved from ambition, his success in the high-stakes world of commercial construction, written in the confident lines of his face. His company, Blackwood Construction, was his kingdom, and their sprawling glass and steel home in the hills overlooking the city was his castle. Smells incredible. Elle, he said, his voice smooth as aged whiskey. He kissed her cheek, a gesture so practiced it felt hollow. Eleanor felt a familiar faint tremor of unease. For the past 6 months, James had been distant, a ship sailing just beyond her horizon. He chalked it up to stress a massive new downtown skyscraper project, the Apex Tower. But Eleanor knew the architecture of her husband's moods better than anyone. This was different. Happy anniversary. My love, she said, her voice catching slightly. She handed him a small, elegantly wrapped box. Inside was a vintage Patek Philippe watch, something he'd admired for years. He smiled a perfect, practiced smile. Eleanor, it's stunning. You shouldn't have. He slid it on his wrist. My gift is, well, it's more of a conversation. The tremor of unease became a seismic shudder. They sat at the long oak dining table Eleanor had designed herself. The lights of the city twinkled below them like a carpet of fallen stars. For a few minutes, they ate in silence, the clinking of silverware, the only sound. Finally, James put down his fork. He folded his hands, the new watch glinting under the recessed lighting. Eleanor, we've had a wonderful life together. You know that, right? What we built, this house, the company, it all started with us. It did, she said softly, her heart starting to hammer against her ribs. James, what's wrong? He wouldn't meet her eyes. He stared out at the city lights. His city. I've done something. Something that changes everything. There's no easy way to say this. I've been seeing someone. The air left Eleanor's lungs. The entire beautiful room seemed to tilt on its axis. The smell of the lamb was suddenly nauseating. Who, she whispered the single word, a shard of glass in her throat. Her name is Chloe Sterling. She works in marketing for one of our suppliers. He finally looked at her, and his eyes weren't filled with guilt or sadness. They were filled with a terrifying resolve. And she's pregnant, Elle, with my child. Eleanor felt the world fracture. It was a physical sensation, a crack running straight through her heart. 15 years, the late nights drawing up blueprints together on their tiny apartment floor. The sacrifices, pawning her grandmother's necklace to make payroll in the early days. Foregoing children of her own because James had insisted they focus on building the empire, first promising one day. That day had never come, and now it was coming for someone else. Pregnant, she repeated the word alien and monstrous. I have to do the right thing, James said, his voice cold and rational, as if he were discussing a business deal. A child deserves a father, a proper family. I'm going to be with her. I'm going to marry her. Tears streamed down Eleanor's face, hot and silent. What about us? What about our family? Our 15 years, that was then, he said, the cruelty of the statement hanging in the air. This is about the future now. My legacy. The conversation that followed was a blur of brutality. He wasn't asking for a divorce. He was announcing it. He had a team of lawyers led by the ruthless Arthur Kensington, who had already drawn up the papers. He invoked their prenuptial agreement, a document she'd signed in Loveblind Trust 2 weeks before their wedding. It was he, assured her, ironclad. It entitled her to a one-time payment of $500,000 and the car she drove. The house, the company shares, the assets, they were all his. You have to leave Eleanor, he said, standing up. Tonight. Tonight. She looked around the home she had poured her soul into designing, every color palette, every piece of furniture, a reflection of her own taste. James, this is my home. It's my house, he corrected her, his voice devoid of any warmth. Chloe is moving in next week. I want to get the place ready. It would be awkward if you were still here. The cruelty was so profound, so absolute, it was almost surreal. This wasn't the man she had married. This was a stranger, a corporate raider, taking over her life. He stood there a titan in his own mind, talking about preparing his marital home for his pregnant mistress, as if he were discussing quarterly reports. Numb, she went upstairs to their bedroom. His clothes were still mixed with hers in the walk-in closet. Her scent was on the pillows. She packed a single suitcase, her hands shaking so badly she could barely zip it. She took no photos, no mementos. She wanted nothing that reminded her of the life that had just been so violently amputated. When she came downstairs, James was on the phone by the window, his back to her. No, it's handled, he was saying, his voice low. She'll be gone in a few minutes. Yes, Chloe, of course. I'll see you tomorrow. I love you. He hung up and turned to her, his face a mask of impatience. He walked her to the door. Outside, a cold, miserable rain had begun to fall, streaking down the floor-to-ceiling glass panels. I've cancelled your credit cards, he said, matter-of-factly. The $500,000 will be wired to your account once you've signed the papers. My lawyer will be in touch with yours. She looked at him one last time, searching for a flicker of the man she had loved. There was nothing. I don't have a lawyer, James. Then you should get one, he said, and opened the door. As Eleanor Vance stepped out into the cold, rainy night, leaving behind the keys to her home on a side table, the door clicked shut behind her. The sound was final. It was the sound of her world ending. She stood there for a moment, the rain soaking her hair, her one suitcase a pathetic anchor in the storm of her new reality. She had no family in the city. Her parents were long gone. Her only real friend was Isabel. She pulled out her phone, her fingers fumbling, and called the one person she knew she could count on. Izzy, she sobbed into the phone. Can I come over? James kicked me out. Izzy Rossi's apartment was a chaotic but warm haven of legal textbooks, half-finished cups of coffee, and fierce, unwavering loyalty. Izzy, a sharp-witted corporate lawyer, with eyes that missed nothing, took one look at her friend's drenched, shattered state and enveloped her in a hug. That absolute son of a bitch, Izzy muttered, her voice a low growl. Get inside. I'm making tea, and then you're telling me everything. And then we're going to figure out how to burn his kingdom to the ground. The first few weeks were a black hole of grief. Eleanor functioned on autopilot, sleeping on Izzy's couch, staring at the ceiling for hours. The same scene, replaying in her mind. James's cold eyes, the click of the closing door. She saw the social media posts that friends, either oblivious or cruel, would tag her in. A glowing article in a society magazine about James Blackwood's new chapter. Photos of a radiant Chloe Sterling, her hand placed protectively on her growing baby bump, standing next to James at a charity gala. In one photo, Chloe was wearing a stunning emerald necklace, a necklace James had given Eleanor for their 10th anniversary. The ultimate humiliation came when she saw the feature in Architectural Lux magazine. The headline read, "A New Vision, Chloe Sterling, Reimagines the Blackwood Estate." The article detailed how the celebrated new lady of the house was gutting Eleanor's carefully curated interiors, replacing her warm classic designs with stark, cold modernism. "She's erasing me," Eleanor whispered, staring at the glossy pages, her heart twisting. "It's like I never existed." Izzy snatched the magazine from her hands and threw it in the recycling bin. "Stop it! Stop looking! This is what he wants. For you to fade away. Are you going to let him win? He already won." "Izzy," Eleanor said, her voice hollow. "He has the house, the company, the baby, his legacy. And I have a check for $500,000 that feels like blood money." She hadn't touched a cent of it. "No," Izzy said, her tone firm. She sat down, her lawyer mode activating. "He thinks he's won. But men like James Blackwood are arrogant, and arrogance creates blind spots." "Did you sign the divorce papers, no?" His lawyer sent them. "I couldn't even look at them." "Good." Izzy leaned forward, her eyes gleaming. "Let's talk about this ironclad prenup. I had a friend at a top family law firm take a look. James is right, it's very well drafted. It protects his assets before the marriage, and any assets acquired solely in his name during the marriage. But she said, tapping a perfectly manicured nail on the table, it has a standard but potentially powerful loophole. A clause about significant non-monetary contributions leading to the material appreciation of marital assets." Eleanor looked confused. "What does that mean?" "It means," Izzy explained, a slow smile spreading across her face, "that if a spouse contributed significantly to the growth of the business, in a way that wasn't just being a supportive wife, if she acted as an uncompensated partner, for example, then she could be entitled to a stake." He called his company Blackwood Construction. "But you told me you were there from day one. Tell me everything, Elle, from the very beginning." And so Eleanor started to talk. She talked about the first 2 years when they operated out of their cramped apartment. How James, a brilliant builder, had the practical skills, but he lacked the vision and the polish. She was the one who drew the initial design sketches for their first custom home project. She was the one who created their first business plan, who chose the company name and designed the logo. She was the one who networked at social events, charming their first major clients, while James talked about concrete mixtures. "I remember our first big contract," Eleanor recalled, a flicker of the old fire returning to her eyes. "It was for the Serenity Gardens luxury condo development. The developer Marcus Thorne hated James's initial proposal. He called it a concrete box. I stayed up for 3 nights straight, redesigning the lobby, the common areas, the penthouse layouts. I used my background in interior architecture to create a sense of flow and luxury. I presented it to Thorne myself. That's what got us the contract. James. He took the credit for it in the press release. Did you keep any of those sketches? Any emails? Any proof?" Izzy asked, her legal mind racing. Eleanor thought for a moment. "In the attic of the old house, there's a box, labeled Genesis. It has all our old files, the early blueprints I drew by hand, my notebooks. Everything." Izzy's smile was predatory. "Well then, it sounds like we need to file a motion for discovery and get you access to your personal effects from the marital home, including that specific box." That conversation was the spark. For the first time in months, Eleanor felt something other than grief, a flicker of purpose. It wasn't about revenge, not entirely. It was about justice. It was about reclaiming her own story. She started small. The $500,000 sat in her bank account untouched. Instead, she took out a small personal loan using her pristine credit history. She rented a tiny one-room office in a less fashionable part of town. She put a simple, elegant sign on the door Vance Interiors. The name felt right. It was her own. She called Maria the housekeeper, who had worked at the Blackwood home for over a decade and had been unceremoniously dismissed by Chloe. Maria, loyal to Eleanor, had been devastated. "Maria, it's Eleanor, Mrs. Blackwood. Oh my God, how are you?" The woman's voice was full of genuine warmth and concern. "I'm okay, Maria. I'm starting my own design firm. I was wondering, do you remember Mr. and Mrs. Albright, the ones whose penthouse I designed a few years ago?" "Of course, they adored you. Said you were the only one who understood their vision." "Do you happen to have their new contact number?" "I think they moved." Maria did. Eleanor made the call. The Albrights were thrilled to hear from her, and as it happened, were looking to redesign their new coastal home. They hired her on the spot. It was a start. She began calling old clients, suppliers, and artisans. People who remembered her work, her talent, and her grace. Many of them had been sidelined by James and his new team, who favored cheaper, less skilled contractors to maximize profits on the Apex Tower project. They were delighted to work with Eleanor again. Her philosophy was the opposite of what Blackwood construction had become. She focused on smaller, high-end bespoke projects, quality over quantity, artistry over profit margins. Her reputation, built on years of genuine talent and relationship building, was still intact. While James was focused on building a monument to himself, Eleanor was quietly, brick by brick, building a new life. Meanwhile, Izzy was a shark in the legal waters. She formally rejected the initial divorce settlement. She filed a counterclaim, citing the significant contributions clause and demanding not half, but a controlling interest in Blackwood construction, retroactive partnership pay, and intellectual property rights to her early designs. James's lawyer, Arthur Kensington, laughed when he received the filing. He called Izzy personally. "This is a frivolous, desperate fantasy, Ms. Rosie. We will have this thrown out of court. Mrs. Blackwood is a homemaker who enjoyed a lavish lifestyle. She is not a partner. My client drew the blueprints that secured your client his first multi-million-dollar contract," Mr. Kensington Izzy replied coolly. "We have witnesses who will testify to that. We've also subpoenaed all financial records and project files from the company's inception, including a box of documents from our client's attic labeled Genesis. We'll see you at the deposition." The laughter stopped. The fight had just begun. Life for James Blackwood was supposed to be perfect. He had the beautiful, adoring, and pregnant woman by his side. He had his castle now being remolded into a monument of modern taste by Chloe. The Apex Tower was rising into the skyline, a testament to his power. But perfection, he was discovering, was a demanding and expensive mistress. Chloe, once the exciting, passionate escape, was now a permanent fixture, with permanent needs. Her spending was astronomical. The redecoration of the house was just the beginning. There were couture maternity clothes, a new Maserati, because the Bentley felt too old-fashioned, and lavish parties to show off their perfect life to the city's elite. Her insecurities manifested as demands her love conditional on his ability to provide an ever grander lifestyle. "Darling, the nursery furniture from Italy is simply a must," she'd say, scrolling through a tablet. "And we absolutely have to have the Monet print for the hallway. It's an investment." James, who had once admired her ambition, started to find it grating. He was pouring money into a bottomless pit of aesthetics he didn't even like. Eleanor's warm, inviting home had become a cold, white art gallery he felt like a visitor in. Worse, the business his bedrock was starting to show cracks. The Apex Tower project was a monster consuming capital and manpower at an alarming rate. To finance it, James had leveraged the company heavily. He'd cut corners, hiring cheaper subcontractors and using lower-grade materials where he thought no one would notice. But people did notice. His longtime friend and chief operations officer, David Chen noticed. The window fittings on floors 20 through 30 are below spec. James David said, standing in James's gleaming office. The subcontractor you hired is cutting corners. We're going to have issues with ceiling and insulation. We should stick with our trusted supplier with Benson's team. Benson's team is 20% more expensive. James snapped, irritated. The new guys are fine. It's a line item, David. That's all. We need to stay on budget. This isn't about the budget. It's about our reputation. David pushed back. Eleanor would never have approved this. The mention of her name was like a spark in a gas-filled room. Eleanor is not here anymore. James said, his voice dangerously low. Her name is not to be mentioned in this office. I am running this company and my decisions are final. Is that clear? David Chen, a man who had been with James since the beginning, looked at his friend and saw a stranger. He simply nodded and walked out, a deep sense of foreboding settling in his gut. The problems mounted. A high-end client for a luxury residential complex pulled out, citing a loss of the company's signature vision and quality. The client, as James later discovered, had immediately signed with a new up-and-coming firm, Vance Interiors. Eleanor was not just surviving, she was poaching his target market. His legal battle was also becoming a thorn in his side. He'd dismissed Eleanor's counterclaim as a joke, but Izzy Rossi was no joke. She was meticulous and relentless. The deposition was a nightmare. Izzy produced sworn affidavits from 3 of their earliest clients, including Marcus Thorne, all stating that Eleanor's design input and presentations were the decisive factors in awarding their contracts to Blackwood Construction. Then came the Genesis box. Forced by the court to retrieve it from the attic, James had opened it himself the night before the hearing. Inside, under a layer of dust, was a world he had forgotten. Eleanor's elegant handwriting filled notebook after notebook. There were detailed budget projections, client notes, and dozens of sketches on drafting paper. He saw the original hand-drawn logo for the company. He saw the schematics for the Serenity Gardens lobby, the very ones she had presented to Thorne. It was undeniable. She hadn't just been a supportive wife, she had been the architect of his success. The knowledge terrified him. If a judge saw this, her claim wouldn't be frivolous. It would be a tangible threat to his empire. He paid his lawyer Kensington a fortune to file motion after motion, burying Izzy in paperwork. But it was costing him both in legal fees and in peace of mind. Amidst this turmoil, Chloe went into labor. James rushed to the hospital, pushing all the business and legal fears aside. This was it, the moment that would make it all worthwhile. The birth of his son, his heir. The delivery was long and difficult, but finally, a healthy baby boy was born. James was ecstatic, overwhelmed with emotion. He held the tiny, swaddled infant in his arms. He had a son. He named him James Blackwood Jr. In the days that followed, a strange nagging thought began to creep into the back of his mind. He would stare at the baby, searching for a resemblance. The boy had Chloe's blonde hair, but his eyes were a piercing blue. James and his entire family had dark brown eyes. Chloe had green eyes. He brushed it off. Genetics were a funny thing, he told himself, but the seed of doubt had been planted. A few weeks later, stressed and exhausted, he was arguing with Chloe over another extravagant expense, a live-in nanny from a high-end Swiss agency. "We can't afford this right now, Chloe." He finally snapped the pressure, breaking through his composure. "The company, there are cash flow issues." Chloe's face hardened. Don't you dare bring your business problems to me. You promised me a life without worry. You promised our son the best of everything. That's why I'm with you, James. That's the deal." The word hung in the air between them. Deal. Not love, not partnership. A deal. That night, unable to sleep, he sat in his home office, the damning Genesis box on the floor next to him. He looked at a photo of him and Eleanor from 10 years ago, happy and full of shared dreams. Then he looked at the bills piling up from Chloe's spending. He looked at the legal warnings from Izzy Rossi. His perfect new life felt like a gilded cage, and the walls were closing in. The nagging doubt about his son returned, now amplified by Chloe's transactional confession. He looked at the baby, sleeping in his bassinet, his impossibly blue eyes. It was a crazy thought, a paranoid, ugly thought. But men like James Blackwood didn't get to where they were by ignoring their gut. With a shaking hand, he opened his laptop and typed a search query he never thought he would contemplate. Discreet at-home paternity test. The DNA test kit arrived on a Tuesday, nestled inside a plain brown cardboard box that was deceptively innocuous. It had no logos, no return address, just a simple shipping label. James carried it into his cavernous home office as if it were an unexploded bomb. He placed it in the bottom drawer of his heavy oak desk, beneath old, irrelevant files, hoping its physical absence from his line of sight might quell the riot in his mind. But it was no use. The drawer pulsed with a silent, malevolent energy. It was a Pandora's box, and he was terrified of the truth it might contain, yet tormented by the not knowing. For 3 agonizing days, a brutal civil war raged within him. One part of James, the man desperate to salvage the new life he had paid for, so dearly, screamed at him to burn the box, to bury the doubt, and to simply be a father. He would look at the infant James Jr. sleeping in his ridiculously expensive, Chloe-approved bassinet and try to force a connection. He'd trace the line of the baby's brow, stare at the tiny, perfect hands, and search for any flicker of the Blackwood lineage. He found nothing. The child remained a beautiful, blue-eyed stranger. Every coo and gurgle, which should have filled him with paternal pride, instead sounded like a question mark. The other part of him, the core that had made him a millionaire, the ruthless, analytical strategist who despised weakness and abhorred being played, could not let it go. This was a variable he couldn't control, a potential miscalculation of such epic proportions that it threatened to invalidate his entire being. To live with the possibility of being a fool was to this part of James a fate worse than any truth, no matter how ugly. On the 4th day, his resolve hardened. The torment of uncertainty had become more corrosive than any potential discovery. He waited for a moment of solitude when Chloe had taken the baby and the Swiss nanny out for an afternoon stroll, an ostentatious parade through the neighborhood he had once dominated. With clinical, almost robotic movements, he retrieved the kit. His hands, usually so steady when signing multi-million-dollar contracts, trembled slightly as he broke the seal. He followed the sterile instructions with grim precision, the swabbing of his own cheek feeling like an indictment, the gentle swab of the sleeping baby's mouth feeling like a profound betrayal. He sealed the samples in their sterile envelopes, his own labeled alleged father, a term that mocked him from the crisp white paper. He didn't trust the regular mail pickup from his own home. He drove 30 miles to a different city, a place where no one would recognize his car or his face, and dropped the package into a public mailbox, the soft thud of it landing inside sounding as final as a gavel strike. The email from the lab confirmed receipt and stated the results would be available in 7 to 10 business days. It began the longest, most excruciating week of James Blackwood's life. During this waiting period, the universe seemed to conspire to amplify his paranoia, systematically dismantling the remaining pillars of his world. On Monday, the call came about the Apex Tower. It wasn't a leak. It was a catastrophic plumbing failure. A main water line installed by the cut-rate subcontractor he'd championed had burst on the 28th floor. James drove to the site, his stomach churning. The scene was one of utter chaos. Water cascaded down elevator shafts, poured through light fittings, and pooled in vast muddy lakes on floors that were supposed to be pristine. The air was thick with the smell of wet concrete, ruined drywall, and abject failure. His site foreman, a man who had been with him for 12 years, looked at him with open disgust. "We told you, These fittings were garbage, James. We told you. The news of the multi-million-dollar flood damage hit the financial press the next day, and the company's already precarious stock cratered. That evening, David Chen came to the house. It wasn't a friendly visit. He stood in the cold white living room, refusing to sit. "I can't do this anymore, James." David said, his voice strained with a sorrow that was deeper than anger. "This isn't the company we built. It's a hollowed-out shell run on ego and bad faith. What happened at the tower today? That was inevitable. You've been cutting bone to save pennies. This is a temporary cash flow problem," James retorted, his voice brittle. "I needed to show a leaner operation. It's strategy. It's not strategy. It's suicide." David shot back his composure, finally cracking. "Eleanor would be horrified. She built our reputation on quality, on integrity. You've torched it. You've torched everything." The mention of her name was a knife twist. "Leave her out of this," James snarled. "I'm tired of hearing her name. You're either with me or you're against me, David." David looked at his oldest friend, at the haunted, desperate man standing before him, and his shoulders sagged. "That's the problem, James. I don't think I'm with you anymore." The next morning, David's formal resignation was on his desk. The operational soul of Blackwood Construction had departed. All the while, Chloe remained blissfully, infuriatingly oblivious. While James was staring into the abyss, she was consumed with planning a lavish christening party, showing him swatches for custom linen and tasting notes for champagne that cost more than his first car. "Darling, we simply must have the string quartet from the symphony," she'd say, scrolling on her tablet. "It's about setting a standard for Jamie, right from the beginning." Each word, each casual assumption of his infinite wealth was another turn of the screw, tightening the pressure in his head to a screaming pitch. On the 9th day, a Thursday afternoon, he was sitting in his office, staring blankly at the tower's skeletal silhouette against the grey sky, when his phone buzzed. An email. The sender was the anonymous acronym of the testing lab. The subject line was chillingly simple. "Your results are ready." Time seemed to slow down. The air in the room grew thick and heavy. He felt a cold sweat prickle his neck. He clicked the email, entered the secure password he had memorized, and was taken to a portal. A link appeared. View report PDF. He clicked. The document that loaded was a cold, clinical grid of numbers and genetic loci. He scrolled past the scientific jargon, his eyes scanning frantically, his heart hammering a deafening rhythm against his ribs. He didn't understand the data, the complex dance of alleles and markers. His gaze shot to the bottom of the final page to a bordered box labeled Interpretation and Conclusion. He read the words once, then twice, then a third time as the world dissolved around him. Probability of paternity 0% 0. Not low, not inconclusive. A perfect, absolute, annihilating 0. The word wasn't just a number, it was a void. It was the sound of his entire constructed reality, his justifications, his cruelty, his sacrifice being sucked into a black hole. He didn't yell, he didn't smash his fist on the desk. A terrifying preternatural calm descended, the kind of stillness that precedes a hurricane. The rage was there, a white-hot supernova of it, but it was buried deep beneath a glacier of shock. He felt nothing and everything all at once. The son he had destroyed his life for the legacy he had cited to Eleanor as he kicked her out. The door was a fiction, a complete and utter lie. He printed the single page, the ink staining the paper with his damnation. He folded it with surgical precision and placed it in the inner pocket of his jacket. He walked out of his office, drove home under the speed limit, his hands steady on the wheel. He was an automaton, a man hollowed out and operated by pure, cold fury. He found Chloe in the living room, a picture of domestic bliss, happily chattering to the baby, who was gurgling in her arms. "Look, Jamie, Daddy's home from a long day." "Say hello to your daddy," she chirped, lifting the infant towards him with a radiant smile. James looked at the child, at his impossibly blue eyes, and then at the woman holding him. Her smile was a painted mask. The loving scene was a grotesque theatre of deceit. "Chloe," he said. His voice was unnervingly calm, a dead flat monotone that cut through her cheerful babble. "We need to have a conversation." Her smile faltered instantly. She saw the look in his eyes, a look she had never seen before, and a flicker of panic crossed her face. "James, what is it? You're frightening me." He didn't answer. He walked past her to the chrome and glass coffee table, the centerpiece of her expensive redecoration. He took the folded paper from his jacket, unfolded it, and placed it squarely in the middle of the table, the conclusion facing up. She leaned forward, her brow furrowed in confusion, and read the words, "Probability of paternity 0%. The blood drained from her face. She went from pale to ashen in a heartbeat, her mouth falling open in a silent "oh" of pure terror. "What? Where did you get this?" She stammered, her voice a strangled whisper. "Does it matter?" James's voice was still terrifyingly quiet. "The question isn't where I got it. The question, Chloe, is who is he? Who is the father of the child you swore was mine?" The tears came then, instant and theatrical, but for the first time they held no power over him. "It's a mistake, James and Merus, I swear. These tests, they can be wrong. We can get another one from a real doctor." "Stop!" The word was a roar, an explosion of all the pent-up rage and humiliation echoing through the vast, soulless house. "Stop lying. Your lies are over. I gave up everything for you. For this child, I burned my life to the ground on the strength of your word. The very least you owe me now is the pathetic, sordid truth. Who is Hickey?" Her facade shattered into a million pieces. She collapsed onto the sofa in a storm of hysterical sobs, clutching the now crying baby to her chest. "It was just before us," she confessed, the words tumbling out between gasps. "My ex-boyfriend. Ryan, he's a bartender. I was trying to leave him, but I was weak. I was with you both. When the test was positive, I was terrified. Ryan has nothing. He could give us nothing. I told myself it had to be yours. I wanted it to be yours so badly. I made it true in my head." The confession was even more pathetic than he could have imagined. It wasn't a crime of passion. It was a squalid little cost-benefit analysis. She'd hedged her bets and cashed in her ticket with the wealthier prospect. James looked at her, a weeping, broken mess, and felt a profound and chilling disgust. He looked around the room at the art he hated, the furniture he found uncomfortable, each item a testament to his monumental stupidity. "Get your things," he said, his voice dropping back to that dead-flat tone. "What?" She looked up, her face a mess of tears and smeared makeup. "Your things. And the babies. Pack them. I want you out of my house." The words were a bitter echo of a past crime, but this time they were laced with the agony of a victim, not the arrogance of a victor. "You can't," she shrieked, clutching the infant like a shield. "James, think of the baby. He's innocent in all this. You can't just throw him out. Where will we go?" James said the words like chips of ice, "is not my concern. He is your concern. And Ryan, the bartender's concern. You have 1 hour to gather what you can carry. After that, I will have you physically removed by security for trespassing." He turned his back on her desperate wailing pleas and walked to the bar. He poured a tumbler of his most expensive single malt scotch, the one he saved for celebrating victories, and drank it down in one long, burning swallow. The alcohol did nothing. It could not touch the cold, gaping wound inside him. He was a millionaire. He was a titan. And he was utterly, completely, and finally alone, shipwrecked in the ruins of a life he had single-handedly destroyed for a lie. The months following Chloe's ignominious exit were not a sudden dramatic collapse for James Blackwood, but a slow, agonizing rot. The grand mansion, once his triumphant symbol of arrival, became a gilded tomb. A profound silence settled over the vast, minimalist rooms, a silence so heavy it seemed to have a physical weight pressing down on him. He'd wake each morning, not to the scent of coffee, but to the stale air of his own failure. Dust, the fine grey powder of neglect, began to coat the sharp edges of Chloe's brutally modern furniture. The infinity pool, once a sheet of pristine blue, mirroring the sky, developed a sickly green film as the filtration system faltered, and he lacked the will to have it fixed. The house was decaying in sympathy with its owner. His days were a monotonous cycle of dread. He'd sit in his stark home office, the phone a coiled viper on the desk. When it rang, it was never a friend, never a peer. It was a snarling contractor demanding payment for the stalled Apex Tower. A clipped voice from the bank informing him of another default, or his own lawyer, Arthur Kensington, his tone shifting from confident bluster to weary resignation. James, the man who once commanded boardrooms with an iron will, now mumbled excuses and promises he knew were empty. He was a king with no subjects, an emperor with no clothes presiding over an empire of debt and disgrace. The Apex Tower stood as his public monument to failure. Its skeletal frame clawed at the skyline, a constant humiliating reminder of his hubris. The project was legally entangled and financially radioactive. No investor would touch it. The name Blackwood Construction, once a benchmark of quality and power, was now a toxic asset, whispered as a cautionary tale at the golf courses and exclusive clubs he could no longer afford to frequent. Isolation was his constant companion. David Chen never returned his calls. Former colleagues and clients crossed the street to avoid him. He was a pariah haunted by the ghost of the man he used to be. In the long, lonely nights fueled by expensive scotch that now only tasted of bitterness, the true nature of his regret began to crystallize. It wasn't just the loss of money that gnawed at him. It was the crushing, undeniable realization of his own folly. He saw Eleanor's face everywhere. Not the weeping woman he'd callously dismissed, but the vibrant partner from their early years. Her eyes bright with shared dreams as she sketched on a napkin, solving a design problem that had stumped his entire team. He had called her his wife, but he had treated her like a decorative asset. Never truly seeing the bedrock of his own success was her brilliance, her grace, her unwavering belief in him. He had traded a diamond for a shard of glass, and the cut was bleeding him dry. In stark, almost cruel contrast, the name Vance Interiors was ascending like a star. Eleanor hadn't just recovered, she had been reborn in fire. Her firm became the city's most sought-after design house, a beacon for clients weary of cold, impersonal spaces. Her work was on the cover of Elle Decor and Vogue Living. She was celebrated for her emotional architecture spaces that were not just beautiful, but deeply human. The office of Vance Interiors, located in a beautifully restored heritage building, downtown, was a hive of vibrant creative energy. The air buzzed with passionate debate. The scent of fresh coffee and expensive paper hung in the air, and light streamed through arched windows, illuminating mood boards bursting with color and texture. Eleanor herself had transformed. She moved with a sense of purpose and a quiet joy that came from building something innate that was entirely her own. One afternoon, sitting with Izzy and reviewing the final settlement proposal, she looked out her window at the distant skeletal frame of the Apex Tower. Izzy watched her, expecting to see a flicker of triumph or malice. Instead, Eleanor's expression was one of melancholy peace. "It's a scar on the city," Eleanor said softly. "All that ego, all that waste. It didn't have to be this way, Izzy." "He did it to himself," Izzy said, gently. "You're just closing the book." "I know," Eleanor replied, turning back to the table. "And I'm not closing it for him or for revenge. I'm closing it for me. I want to turn the page and never look back." The day of the final meeting arrived. James drove himself his luxury sedan, now feeling like a borrowed costume. He parked a block away from her office building, a place he had only seen in magazines. As he walked, he felt a profound sense of dislocation. The city he once strode through as if he owned it, now felt alien and indifferent. He looked up at the elegant facade of the building, the name Vance Interiors etched discreetly in bronze, and felt a wave of nausea. He was about to walk into the heart of the life that had flourished so spectacularly in his absence. He pushed open the heavy glass door and stepped inside. The transition was jarring. He left the cold grey pavement and entered a world of warmth light and quiet industry. The receptionist, a bright young woman who didn't recognize him, offered a polite smile. As he stood waiting, he took in the scene. He saw the beautiful furniture, the stunning art on the walls, the palpable atmosphere of success. It was everything his own life was not. He felt like a ghost at a feast, an intruder from a darker, colder world. Then, through a glass partition, he saw her. Eleanor was standing in her office, not facing the door, but looking at a large blueprint spread across a table with two of her young designers. She was laughing a genuine, unburdened sound that struck him like a physical blow. She was wearing a simple but exquisitely tailored forest green dress, her auburn hair catching the light. She wasn't just surviving, she was incandescently alive. The poise, the confidence, the sheer self-possession she radiated was a force. He saw in that moment three women, the broken soul he had cast into the rain, the brilliant partner he had taken for granted for 15 years, and this new woman, a stranger forged from the best parts of the other two, made stronger in the places he had tried to break her. He realized with a sickening clarity that he had never truly known her at all. She must have sensed his presence because she looked up, her laughter fading into a soft smile for her team before she excused herself. She walked out of her office and toward him. Her eyes met his across the room, and in their depths he saw no hatred, no gloating. He saw something far more devastating, a calm, compassionate finality. This was the moment he had rehearsed for in the lonely confines of his car. The speech, a desperate tapestry of apology and explanation. He had planned to talk about Chloe's deceit, the DNA test, the crushing weight of his mistake. He wanted to make her understand the context of his failure, hoping it might earn him a sliver of her pity, a crumb of forgiveness to sustain him in the barren years ahead. He opened his mouth to begin. Eleanor sounds... But the words caught in his throat, choked by the sheer, overwhelming force of his shame. Standing before her in the vibrant temple she had built to her own resilience, his prepared speech felt like a cheap, pathetic lie. An apology, he realized with blinding insight, was a selfish act. It was a plea for his absolution, a way to lessen his burden. It had nothing to do with her. What words could possibly bridge the chasm of betrayal he had carved between them? How could "I'm sorry" possibly account for the public humiliation, the stolen years, the cold finality of that slammed door in the rain? The air grew thick with his silence. He felt the blood drain from his face. All the power he had once wielded, the charisma that could sway investors and charm rivals, had evaporated. He was stripped bare, exposed as a hollow man, a fool who had burned down his own palace only to realize his queen was the treasure he should have been protecting. He stood there, mute, drowning in the unspoken. He was utterly, irrevocably speechless. It was Eleanor who finally broke the suffocating silence, her voice a calm anchor in his swirling chaos. "Hello, James. Please come in." She led him not to a confrontational boardroom, but to a small, comfortable seating area away from the main bustle of the office. Izzy joined them, her expression neutral, as she placed a single slim folder on the coffee table. James sat heavily, his movements clumsy, a marionette with his strings cut. Eleanor sat opposite him, her posture relaxed but regal. "I imagine you've had time to review the final terms with Arthur." She began, her tone gentle but firm. "I want to be clear about my intentions. I'm not interested in the ruins of Blackwood construction. The debt the lawsuits, the stalled projects. They are the consequences of decisions I had no part in. James could only stare at her, his mind struggling to process the lack of venom in her voice. I'm taking back two things, she continued, leaning forward slightly. First, the full intellectual property rights to all the designs, plans, and concepts I created during my 15 years with the company, including everything in the Genesis box. They were my work. They are my history. They are mine. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. Second, I am taking the name, the Blackwood Construction brand and its logo. As of the moment you sign this document, that name ceases to exist. It will legally belong to me, and I will be retiring it, permanently. It deserves to be buried with the history it represents. The brilliance of her move was staggering. She wasn't kicking him when he was down. She was performing a quiet surgical excision. She was taking back her own legacy, her own history, and leaving him with the anonymous, nameless wreckage he himself had created. He would be forced to rebrand the husk of his company under a new name. A name with no history, no prestige, and no connection to the quality she had once infused into its foundations. She was erasing him from the story they had written, together, leaving him with only his own failed chapter. Izzy slid the document and a pen across the table. James looked down at it. His signature, once a bold assertion of his power, now felt like a confession. With a hand that trembled almost imperceptibly, he signed his name. He stood to leave, a stooped figure in an expensive suit that now hung on him. He felt 100 years old. As he turned, Eleanor spoke one last time, her voice soft but clear. I do hope you find your way, James. It was not an offer of friendship. It was not forgiveness. It was a final, graceful release. The kind of thing one says to a stranger you've given directions to, wishing them well on a journey you will never share. He gave a jerky, almost imperceptible nod and walked out. He didn't look back. He pushed through the glass doors and back into the indifferent city, his shoulders slumped, disappearing into the anonymous afternoon crowd. A ghost leaving the world of the living behind. Eleanor watched his retreating form for only a moment. Then she turned her back to the window and faced the light and life of her office. A deep, cleansing breath filled her lungs. The last chain had been broken. The final page had been turned. She was not looking back. Her future, bright and full of limitless possibility, was waiting. James Blackwood's story is a powerful real-life reminder that a life built on deceit is a house of cards ready to collapse at the slightest breath of truth. He traded authenticity for a fantasy, and in the end lost everything that was ever real. But this story isn't just about his downfall. It's about Eleanor Vance's incredible rise. It's a testament to the quiet strength, resilience, and unbreakable spirit of someone who was pushed to the absolute brink. She didn't just get back on her feet. She learned to fly, building a new life more beautiful and more true than the one that was stolen from her. Her victory wasn't loud or vengeful. It was the quiet, undeniable success of living well and finding her own power. What did you think of Eleanor's journey? Do you believe James got what he deserved? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give this video a like, share it with someone who might need to hear it, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more compelling real-life stories about justice, resilience, and the incredible power of the human spirit. Click that notification bell so you never miss an update. Thank you for listening.